We're going to talk about how to research your genealogy in archives and libraries. So what we're going to do today is we're going to start off with a quote from Albert Einstein. And Einstein said back some time ago, the only thing that you know that you absolutely have to know is the location of the library. I think this is a really good quote for genealogy, because a lot of the times, obviously, we don't know the next ancestor. If we have our family tree, every time we look at a family tree, we're going to see that we have one more ancestor to look for on any line. The way that nature built those trees is that every generation back, we double in the number of people that we can look for. So the longer we spend, the more we have to do. It's just, generally speaking, a never-ending pursuit, which, by the way, is very helpful if it's something that you're interested in for any period of time at all, because some other things may not have that kind of open-ended, always something else to learn, always something else to do research on. So I'm very much in favor of libraries, and have worked in libraries and have spent considerable time, as I mentioned. I have a couple of things to start out with. Number one is, I would just say that don't ever believe that you've looked everywhere for your ancestors. It's not physically or time possible for any one individual to look everywhere. So if you get the impression that you've already searched every record and everything you could possibly find on the subject has been found on a particular ancestor or an ancestral line, just cancel that belief, because it's not possible. And I think I can begin to show you why that's not possible. First of all, we have to get a little bit of an idea about what we're talking about when we talk about archives and libraries and other record repositories. And we're going to focus more on those. And of course, governmental entities and private people and all sorts of other places that there are that records could possibly have been kept. But in order to have it done in an hour, we're going to look at the types. First of all, libraries. A library is characterized by a collection of material. In the United States, we have local libraries, we have state libraries, we have regional libraries, we have national libraries. And so there's different emphasis with each of those kinds of entities. And local libraries can be very valuable. I was visiting a local library in Keokuk, Iowa, right there on the Mississippi River, and found they had original material about my family in that particular library in that small town in Iowa. And that's happened to me across the country as I have gone into various record repositories and places where people sometimes unexpectedly would find material that was directly related to my family, which leads me to believe that there's always more out there and that you're always going to find more information. The second thing is an archive. Now, an archive, a little bit different from a library. I think the main characteristic of a library is something I'll mention again in a few minutes, and that is that libraries are more user-oriented. In other words, they are often open to the public, in fact, encourage the public to come in, and they're sometimes characterized, or most often characterized, by open stacks, meaning you can walk around and pull books off the shelf and check them out in a lot of cases and take them home for a period of time, a week or 2 weeks or 10 days or whatever their term of loan is. Archives, on the other hand, are dedicated to preserving certain kinds of information. The one we show in sort of the shadowy in the background here is the National Archives in Washington, D.C. What they're doing is archiving all of the things that happen in the government. And so there's millions and millions and billions of records that have gone into this building. And this isn't the only building. There are National Archive buildings, branch offices of the National Archives across the United States. And there are other types of repositories that aren't strictly in branch archives. There's around 30 plus different major governmental storage areas. And not all the records are even kept here in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. There's a branch National Archives outside of Washington, D.C., and then there are warehouses where they keep some of the material. Universities and colleges across the United States have libraries. Some of them have significantly large libraries with millions and millions of books and millions of other documents. And each of these libraries generally has what's called a special collections library. And the special collections library takes those items out of all the ones that they acquire for their library that for some reason are either very fragile or need special protection, are things that are so unique that they don't want them in general circulation. So even if the university has a general circulation library where students can go into the stacks and pull books and even check them out and use them and whatever. Usually the special collections libraries are more like an archive. They're closed. You have to know what you're looking for, and then you have to make special arrangements of some kind to get access to the materials that they hold. So these are all different kinds of levels. Museums, we often think of museums as being places where we go to look at items, objects, collections of old artifacts or things having to do with a war or having to do with some kind of other history things. But many museums have special collections also, or have collections of study material, of material that enhances the collections that they have, so that if you go to the museum, you may find that they have collected books and photographs and other kinds of records that may have to do with your particular interest in genealogy. Historical societies have been organized in the United States for hundreds of years now. Historical societies generally have the same kinds of interests, but more narrowly aimed at their local area or their state or their some kind of association with a historic group of people coming to the United States or to other places in the world. And there are historical societies in every state. Many counties in the United States, I would say nearly all of the counties in the United States have some kind of an historical society. They also gather materials. And having visited historical societies over the years, I've found also been able to go into a historical society and find information about my own ancestors, because they lived in the area where the historical society has its interests. Genealogical societies, now we're getting to something that's even more specifically focused on our own interests. There are hundreds of genealogical societies across the United States, and belonged to a few of them over the years. And they also, on occasion, have either people or have records that are extremely valuable in helping us to research our ancestry. It's always interesting to go talk to these people because their insights into what's happening in the local area is phenomenal. I had the opportunity to, with my wife, living in Annapolis, Maryland, a while back for a year, digitizing records for the Maryland State Archives. So we were in the archives every workday for a year. One of the things we got to know about was the Genealogical Society of the Anne Arundel County. So it was the Anne Arundel County Genealogical Society, which was the county where Annapolis is located. And we attended their meetings and got to be friends with some of the members of the Anne Arundel County Genealogical Society. And one of the members of the society and a group of people had absolutely exhaustively identified every single cemetery, even in backyards, and in some cases there was a cemetery in the middle of a major road. There was another one in a hardware store parking lot. Kind of interesting compared out here to the West. I don't think we'd be too interested in seeing a cemetery in the middle of one of our streets, but basically they had identified all these, and there's things like that you may not even suspect that these kinds of things occur. Then you can just extend that kind of exponentially into private and public institutions where there's just about anything you can imagine has been collected and documented, and these kinds of things. I mean, we have the Rock and Roll Museum, we had cowboy museums, we have private collections of all kinds of things across our country and around the world. So it's a lot of things that a lot of places and to go. Now, if you're thinking in terms of, well, okay, that's fine. I've talked to the archives in my area, and I can't seem to find anything that I'm interested in or that helps me. Well, my great-grandfather lived all his life in a little town in northern Arizona. His name was Henry Martin Tanner. The town was called Joseph City. That wasn't the original name, but that was the one that people go by. And I ultimately found a huge collection of everything about the town that had been collected by his son in the University of Utah Special Collections Library. Now, how it ended up in the University of Utah Special Collections Library instead of someplace closer to Joseph City, Arizona, is not much of a mystery once you get to know the background and all the people and everything involved. But from a research standpoint, it was very much a surprise to find out that this kind of collection did. And how I got into the collection was that there was a copy of the entire collection in Northern Arizona University, which was much closer to Joseph City. Flagstaff is on the same highway as Joseph City, Arizona. It's amazing mounds. And so one thing I'd like to caution everybody to think about, especially genealogists, and one thing that's been apparent to me for ever since I got involved very much more seriously in genealogy many years ago, was that working in the Mesa Family Search Library back in 20 years ago now, or going close to 20 years ago now, one thing I knew for sure, they had a very good collection there at the time. And by the way, the library no longer exists, but the books that they had in the library, there were about 3,000 of them, and most of those books are more than 3,000, but there were hundreds and hundreds of what we call surname books of people's whole family lines, showing from a direct ancestor, going back to an ancestor, or all the descendants of an ancestor, or simply about a family. And these surname books, that we call them kind of generically, were on shelves, very visible, very accessible to anybody who walked into the library. But it was amazing to me that in almost the entire time I was there, that almost none of the people who came in to do research in their family or learn about their family looked at the books. And this carried over when I began working at the BYU Family History Library, which, by the way, is embedded in, it's part of the Harold B. Lee Library on the Brigham Young University campus. It became such a thing that I mentioned it many times while I was working there. And one day, one of the other missionaries at the library came running up to me and said, "James, you got to come and see this." And I said, "What is that?" She said, "That lady over there has books." And that was so unusual. All these books are sitting there within like 20 feet, 10 feet, or 15 feet of where these people are sitting on computers, and everybody's ignoring them. And the answer to that is, you can't ignore the book. Physically, right now, we've almost reached a tipping point, if I'm in that kind of position to speak, because the number of books now that have been digitized and are online are so enormous that going to a library and physically looking at a book is probably not as necessary as it was even 5 or 10 years ago. But that doesn't mean you ignore the books, because the books are still there. They're just in a different format, and they're still still almost completely unknown. Let's start looking at libraries first. First of all, in the United States, we have a library system. You might be surprised to know that the American Library Association has over 117,000 libraries in the United States. Because of the nature of a library, and the libraries can obtain materials that has absolutely nothing to do with where they are located physically. The way that a document or a book or some other kind of a record can make its way into a library doesn't have anything to do with how you're related to your family or where they lived or where you were raised or anything else. What it has to do with is how people carry books around, and when they're through having it themselves, whether they give it to a library, whether they give it to somebody else or wherever, those books can end up in a library. And I have trace books on my family, which has no connection that I'm aware of to Florida, to one special book that's sitting down in a library in Florida, which is about as far away as I can get in the United States. And when I said you'll never get through all of the places to look, and that's what I mean. Have you physically gone to more than a few libraries? Or have you looked online at libraries' catalogs to see if there's material about your family? And, if you've done 100, then you have over 117,000 left to go through. So this is kind of the interesting thing that we need to understand. The important thing for a genealogist today is to know that many of these library catalogs are online. It's possible to start to dig into what kinds of materials are in a library catalog. But as I'm going to discuss and just as we go along, that doesn't help you a whole lot. And I'm going to talk a bit here about catalogs, so we'll know how that works and why. But now it's to get some concept of how many books are now online. What are we talking about in terms of books? Well, the first and most important group of books online, the biggest collection of books, is now the archive.org with 36 million books. If you read about the statistics of the Library of Congress, that's traditionally mentioned as the largest library in the world, they say that they have about 28 million books, manuscripts, and other items. Archive.org, this is just the beginning of their collections. This is just books, and they're completely searchable, word for word, and readable online. Even the books that are copyright protected. They are a library, and this library is easily now the largest library in the world. Now, think about it. Are you familiar with archive.org? Have you gone on the world site? Have you done a lot of searching? Do you know your ancestors' books might be there? There might be information. This has become, for me, the next biggest online website for genealogy after Ancestry and Family Search and MyHeritage and the other large online websites. Archive.org is always the place I look, because it's amazing the amount of information that you can find in a library that has 36 million books. Family Search has a specific topic collection, and that's genealogy books that are individual genealogies of families and histories, and also the associated local and state history books that have genealogical information. And they have about 556,000. Oh, by the way, I update these numbers usually a day or so before I give my presentation. When I did the original presentation here, by the time that I figured it out, archive.org is increasing the number of books in their collection. They're digitizing and indexing and putting online books at the rate of about 400,000 a month. And so the amount of information that is incrementally growing in that one website is absolutely phenomenal. Family Search also has gone up. We have another one called the Hot to Trust. It has 17 million digitized books, and these are primarily from universities around the United States. And 7 million of those are in the public domain. The problem is you have to be associated with the university to see the other 10 or so million books they have in their collection. But their 7 million public domain books are very helpful. And archive.org has kind of run around the end of that problem by becoming a library in itself, and is able to lend the books, so that if you run into a book that's copyrighted, you can register free and check the book out free for 2 weeks, and then have the book available online to read. And some of the books are so copyright protected, you can only check them out for an hour at a time. But you can read and study them for an hour and then check it out again, as long as somebody else hasn't checked the book out, which would be pretty rare that someone else would have the same book. Digital Public Library of America. Did you know we had a Digital Public Library of America? It's called dp.la. It has 47 million items. It's not all books. It's images, text, videos, and sounds, but it's all like library books and things. And it has a tremendous amount of information for genealogists because they've collected things. The North Carolina Digital Archives for the universities in North Carolina has been putting many of its holdings on the Digital Public Library of America. This is a relatively new organization, started in the Boston Public Library, and it has grown very large and is increasing the numbers of its holdings by many, many hundreds of thousands of items. It's a constant process with all of these organizations to grow and increase. And there's many other websites that have millions and millions of more books and more records. I trust that many people that I talk to are just overwhelmed, are surprised when I talk about the archive.org, because they have never heard of it. They say, well, why haven't I heard of this? Well, the answer is that it's not a flashy thing. There are not big ads coming up on YouTube or on Instagram or wherever for the archive.org. It's a totally charitable organization. People donate money to keep it going. The guy who started it, whose name is Brewster Cayley, Brewster started this quite a few years ago, and it has grown. One of the things that it has is an automatic backup of the entire internet with billions and billions and billions of web pages. It's unbelievable the amount of information that is being acquired by all these libraries.